I will tell you a story which has a big involvement of the end users, and I think it is important to underline in order to focus better on the key points. So, an open source based SDI for local spatial planning compliant to policy requirements. We are going to briefly talk about what are these policy requirements, enhancement of the existing local SDI, then the data model, a procedure for online editing, WebGIS for consultation of what's produced, and some conclusions. The spatial planning in the Calabria region, which is a region located in southern Italy, is governed by regional law with some number and associated guidelines, which set rules for an harmonized spatial planning at the three different interlinked levels: regional, provincial, at council level. And because it is not so straightforward to univocally translate those rules into operational tools and procedures to be applied by the spatial planners, the development of a common data model was needed. In order to support the 155 municipalities in preparing their council structural plans, which is one of the mandates of the law, which are the spatial plans at council level, the Department of Spatial Planning of the Province of Cosenza, one of the 5 provinces of the region, has enhanced its existing SDI, developing the following 3 additional components: a data model for those plans, a procedures for their online editing, and a WebGIS for the consultation of what produced. This is the existing local SDI, in which there are plenty of applications, all of them based on open source technologies, including also a quite helpful training session with video lectures about how to use all this stuff, also from the client side. In terms of data model, 2 were the main objectives. So, to develop a data model for the council structural plans to be proposed as a reference standard for the municipalities, focusing on the thematic layers and their attributes in adherence to the urban law, and to the outcomes of a technical committee for geographic information system and observatory of the urban changes of the Calabria region. Secondly, to develop a WebGIS-based procedure to enable the municipalities to prepare their council structural plans in conformity to this proposed data model. Mostly, these 2 have been thought in order to optimize the process of the provincial department aimed to verify the compatibility of these plans with the upper level, the coordination plan of the province. Which is the development status? The phase 1 successfully completed a few weeks ago. So we started from a conceptual data model for the council structural plans, created encoding the textual or conceptual rules set by the above-mentioned policy requirements. Then a logical data model has been drafted in Excel format. Please don't be shocked about this step backward in terms of formalism, because if we were starting immediately with some more complex formalism, we lose our end users. So it's better to move a step forward in order to have strength enough to rise the 2 steps forward. And together with this, the physical data model draft in shape files, because these were the 2 languages they were understanding much better. Then a physical data model generated using a PostGIS geodatabase. A draft version of data model has been tested by 8 pilot municipalities, so they have tested all this stuff. And the data model finalized after an intense and fruitful consultation between the participants to the testing and released the version 4.5. So many versions in this period has been obtained thanks to this very fruitful consultation. Phase 2, to be completed in October, the full application of the finalized version of the data model to the 8 council structural plans, formalization of the logical data model in UML, creation of a GML application schema, and last but not least, the adoption by law by the regional government. This is the one big point of strengthness. Phase 3, to be completed in December, hopefully 2012, creation of the mapping rules for the schema transformation for the land use data specification version 3.0, which has been currently under testing by many spatial planners for applications similar like this. The remapping of the available spatial datasets and metadata already created, and a network service deployment. Just to have a look why the importance of the Excel file, particularly because in order to create this common language, the main components you see on the right are the extensive use of code lists in order to achieve standardization. And this is definitely not comprehensible for you, but just to give you an idea of the size of the data model, the box in red is the first part showing in much more details here. This is the first step of formalization in UML, creating classes and starting to encode constraints, because we have a lot of constraints between different values of different code lists. Now, coming to the web-based procedure for the online editing, the use of an open source GIS desktop client to edit the plans in conformity to the proposed standard. From the server-side implemented architecture, we use the open source web server GeoServer. Sorry for not having used a degree, but probably we will make some other implementation. And we enabled the OGC WFS transaction protocol on the PostGIS centralized geodatabase. From the client-side implemented architecture, the use of QuantumGIS open source GIS desktop client, creation in Python environment of custom forms for the population of the geodatabase, encoding all the code lists and the constraints, the relationships present in the data model, and the creation of QuantumGIS style sheets for portrayal harmonization. Just a few screenshots to give you an idea. After the authentication of the user, on the left appears all the precompiled layers of the data model, and then after enabling the editing, at the end it appears this form in which you will see all the code list implemented. Finally, in order to allow the consultation of these plans generated in conformity to the data model, has been created a dedicated WebGIS using map server, but functioning platform integrated in the existing GeoPortal. And this is how it looks like. And you see this is one of the first applications created, in which then, using several functionalities, you can superimpose with other interoperable datasets. So, conclusions. Some advantages of this implemented local SDI for spatial planning compliant to policy requirements. First of all, the use of a common data model which facilitates spatial analysis that can be made on harmonized datasets. These analyses, of course, are useful to perform territorial benchmarking, compatibility checks of the council plans with provincial and or other regional upper-level spatial plans. Secondly, but very important, the use of the online editing procedure, which ensures at the same time, contextually to the editing phase, the compliance of the spatial plan against the policy requirements, avoiding further efforts and costs related to transformation and validation processes, because all the constraints, all the code lists, who populates the geodatabase cannot make any mistake in a wrong use, in a wrong interpretation of the data model, of course. Some advantages of the adopted methodology. We can say inspired by Inspire in terms of transparency of the process, Consultation with stakeholders, very fruitful. Formalisms progressively evolving toward INSPIRE compliance, and very important, we have a roadmap for the adoption by law, which is very, very important. And let me say, fully in line with what we learned yesterday in the panel discussion, in the plenary session, when we heard that let's go at regional, local level for successful INSPIRE in action. So thank you very much, and see you on the SDIs and Smart Public Authorities workshop to be held in Edinburgh the 12th of September 2012, and fully open to any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Giacomo. So it's now time to discuss the presentations, and if you have any questions, you can direct them. I'd like to ask the audience to introduce themselves while asking the questions, and also indicate which speaker you're asking. So any questions, comments? Oh, you feel comfortable and fine about the presentations? If not, then I will start. Okay, please go ahead. So let's discuss within ourselves.
Yeah, it's actually a question for Martin. You mentioned about the degree view service functionality. You said it was based on streaming infrastructure. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what that actually means?
Well, I'm not so much on the implementer side, so this is for me actually a bit difficult question, but it boils down to that, as far as I understood, if you have a very large GML file that you're producing, or that's actually configured or the configuration base for your layer, that it's read by the software feature by feature. So it's like a stream. You don't try to parse the whole GML at once, but you take it feature by feature. So it doesn't really matter how big it is. Is that okay?
Yeah, one other quick question. The support for SLD, does that support the latest? The support for SLD, does that support the latest specification? I think it's 110.
Yes.
Excellent.
So Giacomo, please go ahead.
Question to Martin. In deploying our, with GeoServer, the WMS 1.3, we are experiencing some problems in deploying very large raster datasets. Did you encounter similar problems in degree? I think no, but just to know.
Were you using the coverage service for that, or?
Pardon?
Were you trying it on the GeoServer coverage?
Yep.
Well, actually, we've been working with quite large files there as well, and in that respect, I'm not aware of problems there, but it's worth a try, and then try to get feedback also maybe from the mailing list if you run into problems.
Thank you.
Any questions? Comments? Oh, please go ahead. I guess there should be a microphone here.
Yes, I have a question. I have a question for Martin. Martin, I was a bit surprised when you spoke about degree. Well, sorry, my name is Eric Van Praag from CAF, the Latin American Development Bank. And yeah, I was thinking, Martin, why was the documentation left for the end? In Latin America, we face a lot of issues because people are implementing open source, but they don't have enough documentation. So I'm always a bit surprised when talking about open source that documentation is sometimes like an afterthought. You know, the packages, the open source packages might be developed and then the documentation might be done at the end, which, you know, why wasn't it done at the beginning, I guess, is a key question.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's quite good practice to start also with writing a decent documentation before doing all the detailed implementation work. The problem with that is, on the one hand, the implementers don't like to write documentation. They just don't. They want to play with software and solve the technical issues. On the other hand, as we're mainly funded by projects, it's a bit piece-by-piece work. So you develop an extension for something, but the institution funding this development doesn't have an intrinsic interest in a comprehensive documentation of the whole project. So that has been a problem in the past.
Any other questions? So I have one. We have seen 2 implementations for different countries, and we have a presentation from developer side, the existing technology. So I'd like to ask, what are the main challenges that you come across through all these works to all presenters, and also their opinions about what needs to be done? I mean, for example, if you are planning to implement or adopt an open source software, for example, to an institution or a research institute, what would you do?
I think really you have both technological and organizational challenges when it comes to adopting open source. I mean, technologically wise, of course, you need to have the knowledge and the know-how to be able to problem solve on your own. You don't have that kind of customer service and fallback mechanism that you do with proprietary software. And organizationally as well, it's quite a sea change to suddenly move to open source. Trying to get it past management is not always easy. When we moved a few years ago to open source for our services, we faced quite a few obstructions from higher up, from management, from other departments, and really it's getting that clear understanding of exactly what open source can give you, and an understanding that it can be just as good as proprietary. It just doesn't come as the full package. It's more individual products you're putting together within your own infrastructure, rather than sort of buying in a full package with support. So I'd say those are the 2 main ones.
Thanks. Shall we go on?
Well, I can surely agree with Tom about the organizational challenges that there surely exists when starting to adopt open source software into your own infrastructure. And also, when you start building an open source project of your own, then the main concern for me has been the architecture of that project, because then we need to make sure that the architecture of the open source product that you build is flexible enough to allow for extending it further and to modularize it, so that you can only take the pieces that you need for a certain application. That is important from the performance point of view of the application as well.
Because you didn't show up, that's why I gave
I showed up twice, but please go on.
to think. But let's first finish, then let's come to your comments, okay?
From point of the degree project, besides the issues I mentioned already, it's sometimes an issue of an actual community work which is based on taking and giving. So a lot of participants like to actually use new features, but there are quite some actors as well that develop with degree, but there's a lack of contribution sometimes of actual developments going back into the project. So that could be improved in the future. Again,
The major challenge for us was the involvement of the end users, because I should like to point out this again from the overall methodological point of view rather than the technological one, because any implementation, in order to be put in action, has to focus very much on the end users of these implementations. And in our case, the end users were the spatial planners. They started in January 2012 using only CAD data, and now having meetings with them, fighting that they want a code list or another, conscious of what is a data model and using a WFS transaction. I'm really proud of this, if I may.
Well, thank you, and we can go on. You?
Yes, hello. My name is Arnulf Christel. I'm president of the Open Source Geospatial Foundation. And the main problem in adopting open source is a misconception of the users. That because you don't have to pay a fee for using this license, the whole thing works by itself. And that is a misconception. A simple example, if you pay 500,000 euros for an Oracle license in the cloud, and then you need 10,000 for somebody to learn how to use it, it's not an issue. If you use the same infrastructure with PostGIS and PostgreSQL, you don't have to pay, and the DBA asks for 10,000 for a course, then management will not understand this. So we have this general misconception, because it's open source, nobody's going to help you and you have to do it yourself. This is not true. There is a community and there is an ecosystem of businesses supporting this. So I think this is very important to understand that it's not a generic problem of open source, but it's a problem of the understanding of how the different business models work. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments. Yeah, I also agree with you. I mean, whenever I personally also involved in open source development, software development, and when we talk about people, especially in the governmental organizations or other, let's say, engineering companies, when we say that, oh, we deal with open source products, that's the main perception, that they say that, oh, open source is quite problematic. That's the first thing that they come up with as a comment. And they usually say that it's unstable, you need a lot of human resources, and this is also another cost and all these things. And I think in that sense, there is a kind of need to change this perception. And also open source has to adapt itself based on this need, which is a change in the perception of the open source. Any other comments? Okay.
Yeah, I could have a small comment about how we can organize the development. So, for instance, we are not doing the development of our OSCARI framework ourselves, really. We are contracting several companies in order to develop the framework further and to develop the new modules or new features for the framework in several distinct projects. So you don't necessarily need to do the development yourself.
Yeah, in fact, there is a... okay, please go ahead. I didn't... Yeah.
It's a different question, so if you answer this, please go on.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question to Yanni. I really love this OSCARI and the unpronounceable platform that you have built there. And you were saying you're going to make it open source and to grow a community. Now, as an open source professional, I know that you cannot grow a community. A community has to emerge. So do you have plans around how you're going to help facilitate that the community will grow around this project? Have you planned anything there? I would be interested to learn.
Well, first of all, we will make the open source code available through common open source ways of doing it. So we will establish a GitHub repository, and we will provide a track wiki system where we will have documentation of our source code. And well, to begin with, we have already started with several projects within the Finnish administration who are building the new features for the project, and we believe that once we have a substantial basic functionality for this project, then more and more parties will be interested in using that. But I'm also open to any suggestions as of how to make it more popular for the wider audience.
Thank you. Any other
Just a short answer. Like we learned this morning in the panel, in the plenary, communication is one of the most important things. So I think if you connect to the community channels that can actually publish this information and disseminate this information, this will be very helpful. So probably going to OSGeo, apply as a lab project and go through those channels would be an interesting thing. It's already 18,000 people on the mailing lists of OSGeo, so that really is a big, and it's a global community. So connecting there would probably be a good idea.
Just
Thank you. Yep.
briefly, that's something that we might actually do when we have something that's we feel that is good enough to be published for the wider audience like that. Thank you.
Oh, we have one more question.
Yeah, this is a question for Giacomo. I was really interested, Giacomo, in your presentation. Again, in Latin America, we're trying to get the ministries of planning, which will be similar to these planning committees you talk at the municipal level. So you were saying they were not very advanced in GIS technologies, but they bought into the project. So I wanted to know how did you do it, basically, because we're facing this issue daily in Latin America.
Exactly trying to do what we learned in the plenary, to communicate. So we spent amazing time to sitting in front of them, convincing that they are starting a nice adventure. Starting with total, they were afraid at the beginning, what we are doing, what we are starting. But at the end, with a strong commitment to overcome the initial meetings in which the communication was just one way. But then the success came out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, then I'd like to close this session. And before closing it, I'd like to thank to all the speakers and the participants who flavor and flourish the discussion. And see you after lunch.